Welcome, everyone. My name is Meredith Prince. I'm one of the co-leaders of Indivisible Missoula. Thank you all for being here. This is great. Thank you. So just for kicks, how many of you were here in December when we tried this the first time? A lot of you, but not everybody. So for those of you that don't know, we were next door, and the power went out about halfway through our feature film, Suppressed and Sabotaged, so we had to evacuate the library, which was in the dark, and I don't think anybody got injured, so we were successful, so we decided to try it again. So we started, Indivisible Missoula started just about a year ago, and we've done a whole lot in that time, and we will be showing a short little year in review that Danica, our other co-leader, had put together. And we have a packed schedule for 2026, including No Kings 3 on March 28th. Saturday, March 28th. Yep, so mark your calendars, tell everybody. It's going to be starting at 1, and we're still working out all the details, but we do have Karis Park, so we will be there. We will be marching. We haven't figured out the route just yet, but safety is paramount for us. We want to make sure that the route that we choose is as safe as possible. So we're very excited about that. We have our 1 Million Rising town halls every month, every fourth Thursday of the month. Correct, Candace? Yes? Yes, our first one was on healthcare. It was great. And our next one is February 26th at St. Paul Lutheran. They're all at St. Paul Lutheran Church, and this one, did I cut out? Yeah. All right. That's why I have 3 microphones. Haha. So, yeah, our next one is on education, and it's going to be really interesting. We have, our panelists are Micah Hill, Missoula County Public Schools Superintendent, Brendan Brown, award-winning Hellgate Elementary Director of Special Services, Grace Decker, Early Childhood Education and Advocacy Specialist for Montana Advocates for Children, and the moderator will be Denise Juneau. So that's going to be an amazing program on February 26th from 6:30 to 8:30. That's our 1 Million Rising Education Town Hall. We will be gathering signatures for the the Montana Plan, which is part of the Transparent Election Initiative. We will be making candidate endorsements for the U.S. House and Senate. We will be screening more films about threats to our election system, including Dark Money, which will be on March 1st, which is Sunday at 1 p.m. here at the library in both rooms. So there'll be no confusion which room it's in. I apologize if I sent out B and A, and anyway, y'all made it here. So thank you for that. I also wanted to thank the Montana League of Women Voters for being here. Their table is right over there. And we don't have anybody staffing it, but we do have a table about the Transparent Election Initiative with some more information and a sign-up if you wanted to help collect signatures. And, of course, our Indivisible Missoula table over there. I also wanted to thank Lucas Moody from the Missoula County Elections Office, who is here back there, and he just has all the fascinating information about elections. So after the films, he will be here to answer our questions, tell us things we need to know. Okay. I also wanted to acknowledge the filmmakers of the films that we'll be viewing today, PBS. So Civics Made Easy, we'll be watching 2 shorts that they will be second, hosted by Ben Sheehan, which breaks down the complex world of American government and civic participation. Each episode transforms intricate concepts into clear, digestible lessons, equipping viewers with the essential knowledge to actively participate in their democracy. Designed to power and what the heck? Oh. It says it's on and everything. Hello. Good thing I have 3 of these. What? It's not working. Not working. Okay. Well, unfortunately. Oh, and before I move on, I forgot to thank MCAT, which is live streaming and recording this. So thank you, MCAT.
Can you find somebody from the library? Because that shouldn't happen.
Hey, I'll go. Thanks, Candace. Hello? It's on again. I don't know what the heck. Okay. 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 Yeah, right there. Okay, so just thanking MCAT. Everybody clapped. Thank you very much. They're amazing. We love them. Okay, so back to the filmmakers. So our feature film is suppressed and sabotaged by Brave New Films, which is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization that carries out the Brave New Films mission by creating and distributing educational films. Their mission is to champion social justice issues by using a model of media, education, and grassroots volunteer involvement that inspires, empowers, motivates, and teaches civic participation and makes a difference. And after the film, we will be sending out a link to complete a short survey, which they asked us to do, which we will do, of course. Okay, so that's all the acknowledgments, and with that, I will show us the beautiful, indivisible Missoula little film, and then we will see our feature presentation. Okay.
This started as an online Google document
that changed what was politically possible.
I'm more politically engaged than I ever have been.
Indivisible began as an online guide to the Trump agenda. Now it's given rise to a growing movement.
The sights and sounds of solidarity this morning in Missoula as thousands of people of all ages gathered on the courthouse lawn. The signs and banners covered every topic, from Social Security and Medicare, fear for America's democracy, public land protections, and as with the other protests across the country, the ire included Trump administration immigration policies and the mass firings of federal workers led by the Department of Government Efficiency.
Honestly, just don't think he's doing the right thing, and I think that we could maybe stop it or help a little by doing this.
Like many cities nationwide, Missoula hosted its own No Kings protest where thousands were in attendance.
It's time we make a stand. Enough's enough.
Protesters shared their desire to protect democracy.
Start doing what's right for the people.
protesting the Trump administration, thousands of people gathered for the No Kings rally here in Missoula.
This is not what I fought for. It's not what I sacrificed for and continue to sacrifice for.
Earlier today, protesters took to the Missoula County Courthouse lawn to rally against the Trump administration's potential health care cuts. Rather than chanting or marching, they held what's called a die-in. Protesters say the Trump administration is killing programs that keep them and their families alive, including SNAP benefits, Medicare, and more.
I think we're building the momentum. We're telling people that it's a safe place to come out, express yourself. Kids, dogs, strollers. Organizers are providing opportunity for you to raise your voice because you've got the opportunity in this country to write.
Feeling inspired? Not for long. Suppressed and Sabotaged, directed by Robert Greenwald.
New voter ID laws.
Effort to purge voter rolls ahead of the 2024 election.
States are seeing more threats to election workers.
Armed individuals showing up at polling locations.
Photos of people with their faces covered, wearing tactical gear, and carrying guns.
Targeting voters of color, young people, people with disabilities, working class Americans.
Closing polling places in our community, eliminating drop boxes in our community.
We are witnessing a tidal wave of voter suppression around the country.
Driven by Donald Trump's claims of a stolen election, we see states across the country passing laws that make it harder for some people to vote.
I don't want everybody to vote. Elections are not won by a majority of people. They never have been from the beginning of our country, and they are not now.
If you want to understand how voter suppression can actually impact the outcome of the election, just go back to 2018 in Georgia in the governor's race between Brian Kemp and Stacey Abrams.
Georgia greased the wheels of the voter suppression machine that ultimately was replicated across the country.
Stacey Abrams looking to make history by becoming the nation's first female African-American governor.
Pull back that veneer and you see something really rotten happening. It's almost like termites coming in, they're in the wood, they're eating the wood away, and you don't even realize your house is getting ready to collapse until it's almost too late.
My name is Lewis Brooks. I live in Thomason, Georgia, Upson County. And I've been living here my whole 89 years, except the 2 years I spent in service in Korea. In I believe it was 55 or 56, that's when they started to letting black people vote in Upson County. When I went to register to vote, it was tough. They asked me all kind of questions to try to keep me from registering. I passed the test. Once I got my voting right, I decided I wasn't going to let anything stop me from voting. Because I used to walk. You go up the street here, across the next street over there. I walk over there and walk back and vote. And I didn't miss a voting, except when they close the poll. I'm a citizen. It's my right to vote and speak my opinion. Now, I got disabled and I couldn't do no driving. I know I couldn't afford to go that far to vote. This was in a black neighborhood. It made me feel like they would close it down to keep the black people from voting, because most black people vote Democrat. They only closed one white voting place. Everybody from out here in the black section go clean over there to the white section to vote. We're human, and we have our rights to vote just like anybody else.
Restricting access to polling stations is a staple tactic of voter suppression in America.
Texas leads the nation in polling place closures, having shut down 750 precincts in the past decade in largely Latino and black areas.
The state slashed the number of polling places from 3,700 to just 170, a 95% reduction.
That in Jefferson County, in the county that has half of the state's black population, the number of polling locations was actually brought down to 1.
A major Supreme Court decision on voting rights, upholding Arizona voting restrictions.
One criminalizes the collection of ballots by third parties.
The Felix family is pretty large here in Yuma. For some of us who live down in the counties, that would be about anywhere from 30 to 100 miles away from the nearest polling place. Some of my family members are disabled. Some of them cannot drive miles away. Some don't have access to vehicles. With the new restrictions on collecting ballots, that is going to restrict hundreds of my family. It's silencing the votes of many, many rural Arizona people.
You know, the Democrats are working hard, registering all these minority voters. If they can do that, they can win these elections in November.
Keep your eyes on the prize.
This is Fulton County, Georgia. Most of my professional career has been in public service of one kind or another, as a teacher, as a government worker. I moved here in August of this year, but because of my emphasis on always being registered and always having the ability to vote, I did that almost immediately when I got here. Of course, I also knew the importance of the upcoming election, and I wanted to be a part of that history.
Keep your eyes on.
It got closer and closer and closer to the election, and I was getting a little bit concerned, so I called the Secretary of State's office. My name is not on the roll. They can't tell me where it is. So all of that paperwork that I sent in, I don't know where it is. I'm 65, and for the first time, I did not get a chance to vote in a very close election of historic importance and proportion.
Hold on, keep your eyes on the prize.
What happened in Georgia in 2018 became the model for what's now happening in states all across the country, affecting thousands of voters.
In Arizona, a critical state in the 2024 election, Republican lawmakers have been working to obstruct people from registering to vote.
92,000 voter registrations were challenged last year.
The proposed legislation creates new requirements for third-party voting organizations helping people register to vote.
In a way, our legislators are actually trying to intimidate those of us who are doing the work in our state.
Civil rights leaders say Kemp is illegally removing people from Georgia's voters list.
Thousands are purged from Georgia's voting rolls.
Purged from Georgia's voting rolls. 890,000 had no idea they could vote.
Battle is brewing over who's been removed from the voter roll.
There has been
Instance after instance of unlawful voter purging. States are removing voters, many of whom have actually been found to have been eligible but were unlawfully removed from the rolls.
I received the purge notice. So I open it up and I read the first sentence. I, along with 380,000 Georgians, received the same notice.
That's an especially pernicious way to prevent people from voting, because once you register to vote, you would think that you should be able to remain on the rolls. And once you're removed from the rolls, you cannot vote.
I went out and got the mail, and there were 2 letters in there. They looked official. You're hereby notified that the city of Thunderbolt has challenged your right to vote. The city of Thunderbolt states that you no longer reside within the municipality. My license is valid, my address is valid, I own this home. Why are you questioning my right to vote?
You know, the purges, they've been going on for decades, maybe over a century in this state.
Brian Kemp is notorious for erasing the polls and purging people right before the election deadline.
He needed to have his hands on the levers.
You have an umpire who is also playing in the game.
Zooming out to a national view, purging eligible people from voter rolls has become a key play in the voter suppression playbook.
In the Arizona State Senate, vote to purge people from the permanent early voting list.
The bill will put unresponsive voters on a suspense list. If they hadn't cast a ballot in 2 consecutive elections, they'd be kicked off the voter rolls.
We're going to take this list after we've scrubbed it and ask that they be removed from these rolls.
Secretary of State Frank LaRose directed the deactivation of 27,000 Ohio voters.
Thousands of Mississippians have been purged from the voter rolls.
Georgia Republicans introduced a new bill that would make it easier to kick voters off the rolls.
10 days after McWhorter learned his voter registration had been challenged, he defended his right to vote before the election board.
I paid taxes here for 20 years, even though I was homeless.
To disenfranchise a certain demographic. You're trying to put your foot on someone else's neck.
The governor's race is already one for the history books, but it's also seeing record numbers of requests for absentee ballots, especially from African-American voters.
My name is Norman Broderick, and I'm in Powder Springs, Georgia, Cobb County. I've did 24 years in the military, deployed to Iraq twice, Bosnia, Saudi Arabia. I voted absentee before when I was deployed. When I was in Iraq the first time, I voted absentee, and when I was in Iraq the second time, I voted absentee. The absentee ballot is a very important tool that exists to allow people, not only just the military, but anybody who happens to be away from their voting station, to be able to cast their vote.
My name is Peggy Shu. I'm from Johns Creek, Georgia. I left Georgia for DC in the beginning of October, and before I left, I mailed out my absentee ballot application so that our registrar would send an absentee ballot to my new DC address.
I work at U.S. Army Central, which is located at Shaw Air Force Base in Sumter, South Carolina. I'm away from home during the week. I knew I wasn't going to be able to get back to Georgia to vote. I could only do this absentee. I filled out everything I was supposed to fill out. I sent their documents in. I got confirmation that it was received. And to my surprise, I did not receive my absentee ballot.
I checked my mailbox every day. It was like nearing the end of the month. And so I started calling the voter protection hotline. I called my registrar. I sent emails, and it was really getting close to the election date. And I never received my ballot. The election day came and went, and I wasn't able to vote in the end.
When I contacted my wife and asked her about it, I think it was a couple of days before the election, it came here. And I tried contacting the Georgia Elections Board. I was told they did receive my absentee ballot request. Everything was filled out correctly, but that they mailed it to the wrong address. She admitted that, yes, they did mess up. It was their fault. But there was nothing I could do about it. It's too late. It's over with, and my vote will not be counted during this election.
It was probably one of the most frustrating things I've ever experienced. After having spent, my entire college career very invested in the political process, it was, I don't know, like a punch to the gut.
It still pisses me off to this day. Being in Baghdad, voting absentee was easier than being 4 hours away trying to vote absentee in South Carolina.
I took to Facebook, and like the millennial activist that I am, I recounted my experience in a Facebook post. I wrote, "This is what happened. I wasn't able to vote, and if you had a similar experience, let me know." And my friend from high school, she reached out to me and she said, "I also had struggles trying to get my ballot in." Over the course of 48 hours, we had 40 people. So many people in our immediate Facebook circle knew somebody who had a similar experience to us.
People have requested it like far in advance. Some people just didn't get their vote in.
That was when we really realized that this was not an isolated incident. It was a much bigger issue and a much more deeper rooted sort of phenomenon that was going on.
Today, we've worked to get answers about the claim that thousands of voters never got the absentee ballots they requested.
About half of 2020 voters said that they voted by mail or absentee, which is a record number. Today, the state Supreme Court ruled that ballot drop boxes are illegal in Wisconsin.
The court also ruled that another person can't drop off your ballot for you,
making it impossible for Americans to vote.
The Arizona Republican Party wants to do away with the most popular form of voting in our state.
An unprecedented number of mail-in ballot applications have been rejected.
They put a new law on the books that will give voters less time to request absentee ballots, strict new ID requirements for absentee ballots, slash the number of ballot drop boxes.
Florida Governor Ron DeSantis signed new voting reform legislation into law. The law includes limits on drop boxes and changes to how people sign up for vote by mail.
I missed out on a pivotal city council race last year because I did not realize that I had been removed from vote by mail, and I did not get any notification. Unfortunately, I will have to re-enroll every cycle now after each election is over.
Great Tuesday morning, election day.
I live in the South. I'm always worried about election day.
Have a great morning and go vote.
Oh yeah, gotta go vote today.
Since I became a citizen, I have not missed an election. I showed up and a very nice lady, she looked at my ID and said, "No, you're not registered." And I said, no, wait a second. Here's my registration card, and showed them that I was registered. And they said, yeah, but your name is Del Rio with a space, but your voter ID says Del Rio one word, and therefore it doesn't match. In the voter registration, my name shows as Del Rio with a space. My ID is Del Rio, no space. That was a non-match. I said, this is not legal and I need to be allowed to vote. After much discussion, they said to me, this time we'll allow you to vote, but it's a little bit like they're doing me a favor. The right to vote should be something that we should make easier rather than more difficult.
Controversy surrounds the state's exact match law that put the registrations of 53,000 voters, most of them African Americans, on hold because of discrepancies in the way their names are spelled in state databases.
People of color have names that are a little bit less typical, and that's where the errors are at their highest. Brian Kemp knows this.
The policy has slowly been spreading across the country to require ID, and it's now required in 36 states. North Carolina will now require ID for elections in all forms of voting.
A proof of citizenship voting law.
It's going to have a disparate impact on naturalized citizens, people who live in rural communities, and tribal voters.
A new voter ID law in Missouri.
27,500 voters
could be disenfranchised by this voter ID law alone, enough to swing a close election. 200,000 more people would have voted in Wisconsin if not for their strict voter ID law. Trump only won the state by 23,000 votes. The largest drop-off was among black and Democratic-leaning voters.
You know that a lot of Republicans have not been able to win in Wisconsin.
And now we have photo ID, and I think photo ID is going to make a little bit of a difference.
I've always voted. Every election I voted. I wanted to cast my vote. When people tell you and you can't use your current ID, you feel kind of out of place. But I didn't know that I wasn't going to be able to vote.
A group of students will not have their voices heard at the polls, at least not in Georgia.
They're turning a bunch of students away over here.
We're showing up here and at the Booker T. Washington location, and their names were not on the actual roll.
First, they told me I was at the wrong polling station.
They said, you didn't get registered. I was like, what do you mean?
And there was only about 4 voting ballot booths.
They didn't process my registration didn't go through. I walked back to my dorm and said, I guess I just won't vote.
Just before I went to vote, I had been in an African American history class where we were actually talking about voter suppression, about what was it like for people that were going to vote. I filled out a little slip of paper, gave it to the poll workers. They looked up at me and they said, it's coming up in our system as though you're not a citizen of the United States. I just sort of looked at them like they had two heads. Like, I'm sorry, I was born in New York, what? The thing was that I had brought proof that I was a US citizen. I had with me my driver's license, my passport card, and my Emory student ID, but they would not look at the passport card whatsoever to prove that I was a citizen. I walked out crying. What I learned in history class just hours before, this happened to me in 2018.
A Texas representative is proposing a bill that would ban polling locations on college campuses.
How can we expect freshmen who've never voted before, don't have a car, to get out to the elections office?
Texas allows a concealed gun license to vote, but will not include college IDs.
Ohio college students will face voting barriers with the new Ohio voter ID laws.
It removes student IDs as a valid form of voter identification.
Idaho is joining Texas, North Dakota, Ohio, South Carolina, and Tennessee as states that don't accept any form of student IDs to vote.
Removing student IDs from the list of valid forms of identification. We know what you're doing. You don't want students to vote.
Been here for 3 hours, 4 or 5 hour wait. 5 hours.
This is way, way too long for us to stay and vote.
How long have you waited in line here?
About 3.5 hours.
And have you decided you can't stand it? You can't take it anymore? Or are you going to go home?
I'm hurting. I'll be back. I got to go take some medicine.
It was really good. The lines weren't too long and everyone was super helpful.
We don't hardly ever have to wait here. It's always a pleasant experience up here.
If you have a fixed resource, an easy way to suppress the vote is to just make that resource unavailable to the people who you don't want to vote. And that's exactly what happened in the 2018 election here in the state of Georgia. In places like North Fulton County, which are wealthy, there were more machines than anyone could ever use. In black neighborhoods, there were a quarter of the number of machines that were needed to service the population.
Lots of people left without voting.
It was people just dropping off when it became 2 hours, 3 hours. 4th hour is very heartbreaking.
All it takes is a little walking away at 159 counties to influence an election. A little here, a little there, and then in a race like this, which was so close, there you go.
I acknowledge that former Secretary of State Brian Kemp will be certified as the victor in the 2018 gubernatorial election. But to watch an elected official baldly pin his hopes for election on the suppression of the people's democratic right to vote has been appalling.
Governor Brian Kemp signed the state's voter suppression law under a painting of a plantation.
The voter suppression that we saw in Georgia for the 2018 election between Kemp and Abrams was really just a precursor to the voter suppression laws that we're now seeing across the country. They're all based on the same big lie of voter fraud that Donald Trump has been pushing.
The 2020 election was the most secure in U.S. history.
11 fake electors gathered weeks after the 2020 election to sign this document, claiming to be duly elected and qualified to cast Arizona's 11 electoral votes for
Donald J. Trump.
Arizona was among 7 key states that saw fake electors sign documents to subvert the Electoral College process.
Before the big lie took hold, we were facing a variety of voter suppression tactics, allowing a democratic process to move forward, but compromising who could participate in it. Once the big lie was introduced, it was as if we jettisoned elections altogether.
We're building an army of the awakened. We're taking over election boards. We're flooding the zone with poll workers, poll watchers. It's going to be MAGA in the room counting the votes.
Call it election sabotage. Because really, that is what these laws are designed for. They're designed to allow partisan officials to sabotage valid election results.
We will kill you. We will demand an audit. He will demand the truth. Your family, your life. Watch your back.
Not long after the former president tweeted at me, I received the first specific threat. You lied. You're a traitor. Gave my address. Mentions my wife by name, mentions my kids by name.
The staff started getting all sorts of calls threatening that people were going to come and kill everyone in their offices or in their chairs.
Time's running out, Richard. We're coming after you and every motherfucker that stole this election. You're going to be served lead.
I'm going to hang you, traitor.
Give him an Alabama necktie, you piece of shit.
18,000 voters having to do with Ruby Freeman. She's a vote scammer.
Of Ruby Freeman and Shay Freeman Mullins, quite obviously, surreptitiously passing around USB ports as if they're vials of heroin or cocaine.
I've lost my sense of security, all because a group of people, starting with number 45 and his ally, Rudy Giuliani, decided to scapegoat me and my daughters.
You should go into Detroit, and you should go into Philadelphia, and you should go into some of these places, Atlanta, and we got to watch those votes when they come in.
Donald Trump said there was rampant fraud. He didn't say it was happening everywhere. He said it's happening in Detroit, Philadelphia, Milwaukee, Fulton County, Georgia, Maricopa County, Arizona, Harris County, Texas, large urban centers with large populations of color, blaming non-existent election fraud on black election workers.
I think election subversion is literally the most dangerous threat that we have for democracy right now.
When you are saying things like, no one can win unless my candidate wins, you are really creeping towards authoritarian rule. And that is something completely different than we have seen in the past.
They recognize that a rising electorate of a multicultural America that happened to be Latino, Black, Asian, and young shared and espoused very different values of what America's future should be. And so instead of fighting for those policy positions, what they decided to do instead was to be politically expedient, to be sloppy, to cheat. We are not going to let them take from us what our grandparents and parents fought and suffered and died to give us in the first place.
You see how hard they are working to suppress your voice. That means that there is value in it.
Educate your friends and family, your coworkers, your community.
We should be burning their phone lines up right now around voting rights.
Register people to vote. Register your friends, your family, talk to everyone. Become a poll worker, get trained.
If you don't like something, you can either, volunteer or run for office.
We have to be organized and we have to be engaged.
The entire American experiment of a multiracial democracy is at stake this year. That's the question that's on the table right now.
Any voter suppression law is not just about black people, it is about America itself.
On my mother's dying bed at 92 years old, former sharecropper, her last words were, "Do not let them take our votes away from us."
We've got to make democracy together.
From sea to shining sea.
Okay, we all feel real fired up now, real happy. Well, we need to be informed to know, what's been done and what they're going to try to do. So we're going to move on to our shorts, which are the PBS shorts, Who Has the Right to Vote, followed by How Elections Actually Work. These are each 11 minutes each, and then we'll have our discussion.
Why do we vote on a Tuesday in November?
I'm not entirely sure, honestly.
I don't know the answer.
Hard to say.
I'm pretty sure it has something to do with farming, or there was something farming related.
Oh my God.
Voting in America is complicated. There isn't one shared process for all of us. When and how we cast a ballot is different depending on where we live. On one hand, this makes our elections harder to hack. On the other, it makes them confusing. So, who runs our elections? How do they work? And why is Election Day a Tuesday in November? By the end of this, I promise you'll have a better understanding of why we vote the way we do. And if you don't, I don't know what to tell you. That's on you. I'm Ben Sheehan, and this is Civics Made Easy. Who runs our elections? To start, the federal government does not run our elections. It can help fund them through the Election Assistance Commission, an independent bipartisan agency. But the federal government does not oversee our elections at all. So, who does? Per our Constitution, the times, places, and manner of elections for Congress are up to your state's legislature. That's the people who write your state's laws. These state legislators decide if you can vote by mail or use a drop box. They pick the date your ballot has to arrive by to be counted. They determine if and when you're allowed to vote early. If you need an excuse to vote early, which is called absentee voting, they decide if you can register to vote online, by mail, or in person. In some states, you have to register a month before the election if you want to vote. In 20 others, you can go to the polls on Election Day, register right there, and vote. And in North Dakota, there's no voter registration at all. You just go to the polls with a valid form of ID and cast a ballot. Clearly, this process is all over the place, but something that is true for all states is that today, only American citizens are allowed to vote in either federal or state elections. Some cities and towns let non-citizens vote in local elections like city council or school board, but any non-citizens voting in presidential, congressional, or state-level elections is illegal. And while states are the ones that make most of our election laws, Congress gets some say in our elections. It can make or alter the times, places, and manner of elections for Congress. And it gets to pick the time of choosing the electors, meaning the members of the Electoral College, the people who vote directly for president and vice president. Congress has chosen Election Day, the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November. This has been the day for presidential elections since 1848 and congressional elections since 1876. But why? Why is Election Day a Tuesday in November? Prior to 1848, states could hold their presidential elections anytime during a 34-day window leading up to the first Wednesday in December. But as communication methods improved, this 5-week period made it possible for states with early elections to affect states with later ones. Someone could see how Virginia voted, tell Georgia, and create a problem. Congress responded to this by establishing a single day for presidential elections nationwide. But why November and why Tuesday? In the 1840s, most Americans were farmers. We planted crops in March and harvested them in October. Congress didn't want to interrupt our work schedule, which left November, December, January, and February as potential options. But in most states, December through February was too cold. And because it sometimes took a day to get to the polls, that could mean death with no heated cars and seat warmers. This left November as the best option, and the earlier the better for maximum warmth. But why the Tuesday after the first Monday? Well, back then, farmers markets were on Wednesday, and most Americans being Christian had church on Sunday. With the long travel time to many polling places, Congress didn't want to interrupt our weekend. How nice of them. So they picked Tuesday. We could leave Monday, vote Tuesday, and then get back for the farmers market by Wednesday. And by making it the Tuesday after the first Monday of the month, that ensured Election Day would never be on November 1st, the day when many farmers did their bookkeeping for the previous month. Fast forward 180 years, and we're still using this day for elections, even though 99% of Americans are no longer farmers. I'm here at the South Pasadena Farmers Market to see if today's farmers have any preference on whether or not to keep Election Day on the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November.
I usually have an opinion on things, but this one I couldn't tell you.
I don't think it makes that much difference in this day and age, so.
Change the date, obviously, to a weekend.
I think Thursdays works best. For us personally, we have a market on Tuesday already. I don't think it has to be a set date, maybe it can be a full week.
You can move it around, take turns, maybe switch it up.
Yeah.
Congress can change this whenever it wants, and it has tried unsuccessfully. But again, Congress doesn't run our elections, and while state legislatures make our election laws, they actually don't run them either. So who does? You may not know this, but your state has a CEO, a chief elections official. In most states, this is the Secretary of State. Sometimes it's your lieutenant governor or an elections board. And this person or commission oversees everything from voter registration to maintaining voter rolls. These are lists of registered voters to tracking and certifying the election results. In fact, here's a map that shows the chief elections official in your state. But while that person or group does a lot, they can't oversee every polling place, which is why our elections are really run and funded by counties. The county clerk, sometimes called an auditor or commissioner, is the person mostly responsible for running elections in each of America's 3,069 counties. They oversee the printing and designing of ballots. They obtain and maintain voting machines and voting booths. They count the votes and post the tallies on county websites, which our news media tracks to report live results on election night. Counties also train poll workers. Think about it, there are more than 100,000 polling places in America which are run by more than 600,000 volunteer poll workers. And counties are also responsible for election security. Sometimes they even set the locations and hours of polling places. In 2020, the Harris County clerk in Texas kept some polling places open all night so that people who couldn't take time off from work or childcare could cast a ballot. Which is another thing you might be surprised by. We don't all get time off to vote. Whether we get time off to vote, paid or unpaid, is up to our state legislators. And because many states have no laws on this, that means it's really up to our employers. As of this filming, only 21 states require employers to give their workers paid time off to vote. Which means in most states, if you go to the polls, you could miss out on wages or risk getting in trouble with your boss. And when we do get paid time off to vote, it's usually an hour or two, which may not be enough if your polling place has a line or is far away. Many states offer early voting on weekends, but that's not always possible either, especially if it's just one weekend or if you have work then too. So is there anyone out there trying to make voting more convenient for people other than farmers without cars?
Meet Ben Hovland, Commissioner of the U.S. Election Assistance Commission.
Commissioner,
welcome.
Thank you so much. It's twice, right?
Up to you.
Now we formally have to start.
That's right.
I understand from my research that states and counties run our elections.
That's absolutely right.
What do you do?
So Congress created the Election Assistance Commission with the Help America Vote Act of 2002, and it set us up to be an assistance commission and to support those state and local election officials who run elections.
This is not a federal election year, so what is the next 6 to 12 months look like?
I guess number one, it's not an off year. We've got federal elections every 2 years and federal general elections every 2 years, but we have municipal elections. You also have the ongoing work, things like voter registration, list maintenance, which is cleaning up the list. You also use those off years to look back at what you learned from the previous election and implement new programs.
This brings us to, can we reform our elections? Congress has tried. It recently proposed a bill that would require employers to offer 2 hours of paid time off to vote. Congress has also proposed making Election Day a federal holiday, something supported by 72% of Americans. Because let's face it, who doesn't want another holiday? But as of now, those bills have not passed, so it's up to states and counties.
Do you think that we should make Election Day a federal holiday? Do you have a personal opinion?
Well, if you make it a holiday, then, some people have off work, but some people don't. Public transit schedules are different for the election administrators. Now it's overtime for all their staff that are working that day. And so there are consequences to that.
Today, 5 states, Hawaii, Illinois, Maryland, New York, and West Virginia, have made Election Day a state holiday and require employers to give you paid time off to vote. And while these 17 states haven't made Election Day a state holiday, they do require employers to offer paid time off to vote, while all other states I haven't mentioned do not. On the bright side, many states have expanded early voting. In 2020, partly in response to the pandemic, a historic number of Americans, over 100 million people, voted early, either in person or by mail. And 76% of Americans do support early in-person voting, which is available now in some form in 47 states and DC. The only 3 that don't offer it, Alabama, Mississippi, and New Hampshire, also haven't made Election Day a state holiday and don't require employers to give any time off to vote, paid or unpaid. In those 47 states and DC with early voting, Election Day isn't when elections happen. It's when they end. It's the last day to vote. In a way, this kind of comes full circle with how elections used to be before 1848, when states had a month to hold their presidential elections. But unlike back then, today's polling places don't serve whiskey and have fewer fistfights. But that might depend where you cast your ballot. Also, in the early 1800s, voters had to bring their own paper to the polls to write their votes on. So we've come a long way. Especially when it comes to voting by mail, which is now available in every state. But you'll need an excuse in some, like you'll be out of the state on election day or you have a health condition that prevents you from going to the polls. On the other hand, there's these states: California, Colorado, Hawaii, Nevada, Oregon, Utah, Vermont, and Washington, which mail a ballot to every registered voter. You can return it by mail, bring it to a drop box, or take it to your polling place. And if you'd rather vote in person, you can still do that if you like.
I've heard from a lot of friends about voting by phone. They would rather do that than have to go to a polling place. What are your thoughts on that?
The reality is it is harder than banking because secrecy of the ballot is a big deal. There's some stuff that your viewers will get really excited about called end-to-end cryptographic standards.
That does sound exciting.
But the reality is, I think we still have a ways to go before we get there.
Lastly, when it comes to voter registration, most states let you register online, but these ones do not. You'll have to register by mail or in person at your county elections office. I realize this is a lot, but the point is that voting laws and rules vary greatly by state and county. So check your county elections website and your state elections website for up-to-date info, especially because so many different people run our elections, including you. If you're interested in helping with our elections, you can go to a site like powerthepolls.org, a nonpartisan, nonprofit website which helps you sign up to be a poll worker so the elections in your state and county can run more smoothly. And finally, if you're a farmer, I'd love to hear in the comments if the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November really still is, after 180 years, the most convenient time for you to vote. The rest of us want to know. I'm Ben Sheehan, and I hope you learned something.
Last question, can I keep this?
Sure. Not enough.
Do you have the constitutional right to vote for president?
Yes, I do.
As an American citizen, yes, I do.
Yes. Yes.
Absolutely. Last election, more than 150 million people voted, while another 90 million chose not to. But whether or not we do it, all Americans have the right to vote, right? I mean, there are whole amendments on it. But if you read the fine print, your specific right to vote isn't in here. And in terms of voting for president, you don't have the right to do that at all. In this episode, I'll explore who can vote today, the history of voting rights, how voting varies from state to state, and whether we actually have the right to vote for president. We'll also meet up with some legal experts who can help us get to the bottom of this. I'm Ben Sheehan, and this is Civics Made Easy. Who can vote today in America? If you remember from our Election Day episode, states make their own voting laws. And every state says if you're a US citizen and at least 18 years old, you can vote. Although some states postpone or deny your right to vote if you've been convicted of a crime, which we'll get to later. As for who can't vote, people under 18, as well as non-citizens, are not allowed to cast a ballot in either federal or state elections. Non-citizen voting has actually been illegal in every state since 1926. And in 1996, Congress added more criminal penalties if non-citizens were to vote in elections for Congress or president. But there are roughly 16 cities and towns in California, Maryland, and Vermont, plus DC, that do let non-citizens vote in local elections, like city council.
And roughly 12 cities and towns in those same 3 states, plus New Jersey, let 16-year-olds vote in local elections like school board.
So, to get this out of the way, although non-citizens could vote in at least 40 states and territories before 1926, it is not true that today, or any time in the past 100 years,
that non-citizen voting in federal or state elections has been legal or frequent. In fact, Georgia's Secretary of State found that over a 25-year period, out of the millions of Georgians who registered, just 1,600 non-citizens attempted to register and none succeeded. And Michigan's Secretary of State found that in the 2024 election, of the 5.7 million voters who cast a ballot, 15 may have been non-citizens. And finally, according to the Heritage Foundation, of the more than 1.8 billion votes cast since 1982 in either presidential or midterm elections, just 1,600 were proven instances of fraud. That's 0.000089%.
But it is true that throughout much of our history, states have prevented US citizens from voting. A history of voting rights. Believe it or not, the US Constitution doesn't say who can and can't vote. Instead, it says that if your state lets you vote in its state house elections, then you can vote in its congressional elections. Now, Americans have always been able to vote for the House of Representatives, but only since 1913 have we been able to vote for senators. Before that, they were chosen by state legislatures, the people who write our state laws. But the reason the Constitution doesn't say specifically who can vote is because its authors couldn't agree. So the compromise was that it would be left up to each state. And you might be surprised by who states let vote, at least at first. For example, after the Constitution took effect in 1789, New Jersey let women vote, although just for 2 decades. And of the original 13 states, 10 let free black men vote, although in North Carolina they had to own property. Back then, the only states that limited voting to property-owning white men, aka 6% of the population, were Virginia, South Carolina, and Georgia. But over the following 50 years, states began to pass laws to prevent free black men from voting. States also began to remove property requirements. By 1821, only 3 states still had them. So in effect, more white men could vote, but fewer free black men. Fast forward to 1865, when the Civil War ended and the 13th Amendment banned slavery. The 14th Amendment, 3 years later, made people who were enslaved US citizens and effectively punished states for not letting black men vote. And in 1870, the 15th Amendment said that voting rights can't be taken away because of someone's race. Problem solved? I'm sorry if you had to find out this way, but that's not quite how the story goes. Here's where that fine print comes in. The 15th Amendment says that states can't deny or abridge voting rights to people because of their race. Which means you can't lose those rights because you're black, but it doesn't mean you get them in the first place. So for the next 100 years, states, primarily southern ones, exploited this loophole to prevent black men from voting. For example, they made them pay a poll tax,
a fee you had to pay before casting a ballot.
Given the racial wealth disparity, this had a disproportionate effect. They also passed literacy tests, which, since many formerly enslaved people couldn't read, also acted as a way to gatekeep the voting booth. Sometimes these tests asked people to read the Constitution backwards or upside down. Some had nothing to do with literacy at all, like guessing the number of jelly beans in a jar or bubbles on a bar of soap. There were also grandfather clauses, which said if your grandpa could vote, then you can vote. And some states were even more explicit and only let white people vote in the primaries, while technically allowing black men to vote in the general election. Again, all of these things were designed to skirt around the deny and abridge language in the 15th Amendment, language that also shows up in later amendments regarding voting rights for women, people 18 and older, and more. So, if the Constitution has all these loopholes, then where does our right to vote come from? Your specific right to vote does come from the Constitution, just not the one you think. I met with 2 professors who are total experts on voting rights and state constitutions to learn more. Joshua Douglas, state constitution expert from the University of Kentucky, and Richard Hassan, constitutional expert from UCLA. A lot of people are probably surprised to hear that there isn't an affirmative right to vote in the Constitution. Why isn't there one?
The founders didn't believe in universal suffrage. Most people were not allowed to vote. Women were disenfranchised, slaves were disenfranchised, and African Americans were disenfranchised even in places where they were not slaves.
So if there isn't an affirmative right to vote in the US Constitution, where does our right to vote come from?
Every state in their constitution has its own protections for the right to vote, but those were written in very general ways, and how much they're enforced and how much protection they give for voters depends upon the way that the state courts have interpreted the Constitution.
This is a good time to mention that, like the United States and the US Constitution, each state has its own constitution. Think about it like the terms and conditions sheet for existing in your state. This is where your right to vote is spelled out. To get a better understanding of voting rights in state constitutions, I'm talking with Professor Joshua Douglas at the University of Kentucky. Professor, why do so few people know what's in their state constitutions, let alone that they even have one?
I don't think we do a very good job teaching it. But just in terms of kind of the foundational starting place, the state constitution sets up the state government, just like the U.S. Constitution sets up the U.S. government. So, why do you have a governor in your state? Because the state constitution creates the office of the governor.
What would you say are the big differences between a state constitution and the U.S. Constitution?
State constitutions often, and most of them do, set out what we call affirmative rights. And that's kind of different from the U.S. Constitution, because the U.S. Constitution, it recognizes rights, but it does it, for most of them, in the negative. So what do I mean by this? The First Amendment says, of the U.S. Constitution, says Congress shall make no law abridging freedom of speech. It doesn't say that we have freedom of speech. It says Congress can't make law that takes it away. So it sort of assumes that the right is there. Many state constitutions, by contrast, actually set out the right.
State constitutions are what initially gave voting rights to property-owning white men, or men without property, or even some women and free black men. And they're also what took those rights away from those last two groups well into the 1900s. Some state constitutions, like these, let women vote well before the US Constitution protected that right. State constitutions and state laws are also what implemented poll taxes, literacy tests, grandfather clauses, and whites-only primaries. So how did this eventually change? Well, in 1915, the Supreme Court banned grandfather clauses, and in 1944, whites-only primaries. In 1964, the 24th Amendment banned poll taxes. And that year, and the following, Congress passed the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act, arguably the two most famous laws in American history. Among many other things, they outlawed literacy tests, which means voting was finally legal and accessible to American citizens of both sexes and all races for the very first time. Today, the only group of American citizens who potentially can't vote are felons, people incarcerated, on probation, or on parole. Depending on the state, they can temporarily or permanently lose their voting rights. Unless we're talking about Maine, Vermont, or DC, which actually let you vote from jail. And the reason states can do this is because of a loophole in the 14th Amendment, allowing voting rights to be taken away as punishment for a crime, similar to how the 13th Amendment lets slavery still be used as punishment for a crime. But other than felons, if you're an American citizen and at least 18, you have the right to vote in federal and state elections in every state, except in presidential elections. We don't have the right to vote for president? I promise you, I'm not making this up. In our Constitution, electors, the members of the Electoral College, who we learned about in episode 1, vote directly for president and vice president. And it's up to our state legislature to choose how we pick those electors. At first, many legislatures picked the electors themselves, and we didn't get any say. But by 1828, every state besides South Carolina had switched over to a popular vote. And it works like this. We vote for president, and whoever wins, their political party's electors pledge to vote for them in the Electoral College. In other words, you don't vote for president. You vote for people who then vote for president. And you get to vote for those people thanks to your state's constitution, not the US one. Because here's the kicker. The Supreme Court has said that state legislatures at any time can take back the power to appoint electors, meaning not letting us vote for president at all and choosing the electors themselves. In other words, voting for president is just a nice thing our state legislature lets us do. It's a luxury afforded to us by our state constitution, not the US one. So what would an affirmative right to vote in the Constitution look like? What do you think it should say?
If you look at the German Constitution, it says that every adult citizen has the right to vote for their parliament.
Why couldn't it just be a federal law? Why do we have to enshrine it specifically in the Constitution?
If you put the stuff in a statute, you leave it to the Supreme Court to say, well, that doesn't comply with the Constitution. When you put it in the Constitution itself, it's much harder to go around that.
What do you say to people who may not agree with it to convince them that this amendment is needed?
I point to a case called Carrington versus Rash. Texas barred military voters from voting in Texas elections on the idea that these were people who were not really citizens of Texas. It might be that there's going to be a point in time when both the Democratic Party and the Republican Party see it as in their interest to protect voting rights. And if that moment comes, then we could have an opening for a constitutional right to vote.
Which brings me to my final point, one that doesn't just apply to voting. It's not enough to know what your rights are. You have to know where they are. At least if you want to strengthen the rights you have or add new ones. And this can be really hard to track, because a right could be found in the US Constitution, or in a law passed by Congress, or a Supreme Court decision, or in your state's constitution, or state law, or a decision from your state's Supreme Court. Yes, states have their own Supreme Court. So that's 6 different places. And if you throw in executive orders from the president or your state's governor, that's 8 places where rights of various levels of strength can be found. If that process sounds easy to navigate, then I've got a jar of jelly beans that you can help me count. To sum things up, in the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson wrote that we are endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights. And to secure these rights, governments are instituted by us. And if those governments become destructive, meaning they don't secure our rights, then it's our right to alter them. Or abolish them, which is what he and his friends did. So to protect your rights, and the rights of the people you care about, you have to know where they're found and where they're not. So, as a takeaway, in addition to reading the US Constitution, might I recommend you look at your most up-to-date state constitution, which I'm almost positive you've never read or potentially even knew existed before this video. You can find it online as well as the US one. And if you'd like a little help in understanding the US Constitution, might I suggest a book? You can DM me for details. I'm Ben Sheehan, and I hope you learned something. For more episodes of Civics Made Easy, subscribe to the PBS YouTube channel. You can also DM me anytime on Instagram, TikTok, or YouTube. I promise there are no stupid questions.
Great. Okay, Lucas, do you want to come on up here? Sure. So yeah, Lucas is with our county elections office, and he knows a lot about our local Montana elections. So he can answer our questions and enlighten us. Microphone for people that want to ask questions. Did you want to just kind of start off with a little anything, or do you want me to ask a question to you?
I mean, I can start off with a bit of history, just mostly my own history around this. A number of these things were touched on, and just to clarify, any opinions expressed are my own and not representative of Missoula County elections. But yeah, so like they touched on various like voter suppression things that have happened in those videos. Like one of the big things that happened was in 2000 with Bush v. Gore, where we had like the Supreme Court basically determined the outcome of the election by decreeing that the count was over. And with that, but even before that, we had indication of what they were talking about in 2017 and the like already happening there, because Florida and Texas got together. They both happened to have governors named Bush at that time, and they mutually just exchanged prison lists of prisoners. And if you were on the list in either state and had a name that matched anyone on the list in either state, you were wiped from the rolls. This caused a lot of issues with people getting obviously angry about that. And so they realized that, especially due to like sort of this ruining the U.S.'s reputation a bit on the world stage, just with our electoral process being thrown into doubt, 4 years later, they came up with a way to do this without appearing to do it. And that was where they quietly purged people from the rows, but rather than saying you can't vote, instead you were told that, oh, we have provisional ballots and you can vote. Now, that comes back to bite us here in Montana, because we had been using provisional ballots for a long time, and using them in the intended purpose, which is that if like someone had a damaged ballot or sent in their ballot but doesn't think their ballot's going to arrive in time, they can come in and request a provisional ballot. And the provisional ballot is then counted if their first ballot never arrives and is not counted. But this caused issues for us, because even down in Florida, where this had been occurring, where people had been denied the right to vote and like they had generally thought they had voted by getting these provisional ballots, it nonetheless ended with them being disenfranchised. So we had a lot of folks in Montana here who were very suspicious of provisional ballots. And that was something that we had to like undo the damage with our local populace. Because I've been working for the elections for over a decade now, and when I first started, I like read this article that was talking about Montana elections. And as mentioned, each state has their own different means of conducting elections. And so I initially thought that this article that the guy was writing, that he was taking the piss out of Montana, because he was like, Montana's website, easy to navigate. Montana's polling places, easily located. Frequently asked questions, genuinely helpful. And it took me, and then I realized, no, he's actually being complimentary, that Montana had at the time one of the best election systems in the United States. And a lot of that has to do with like Montana's own history of having a lot of corruption in our electoral process with the Copper Kings. just a lot of like trading political offices as favors, just buying political offices, to the point where Montanans got together and enshrined a lot of laws about elections, about disallowing dark money and the like in Montana elections, which came to a head then when Citizens United basically said that corporations have the right to contribute any amount of money that they want into elections, which the U.S. which Montana challenged to the Supreme Court, but was ultimately overturned on the basis of the First Amendment and saying that, well, we're protecting the rights of corporations to express their free speech. This is actually one of the things you can sign up for, as mentioned, is the Montana Plan, which Montana, again, having a history of actually fighting to protect the rights of people and voters, is actually challenging Citizens United now on the basis of the 10th Amendment. That on that basis that by the 10th Amendment basically decrees that whatever rights aren't given to the federal government are given to the state. And among those rights are the right to charter corporations. Now, the corporate charters haven't been like changed like in 100 years, but the states still have the right to do so. And so there's nothing saying that Montana couldn't decide that that corporate charters do not give corporations the power to contribute to money in elections. And if you don't have the power to do something, then you don't have the right. I was explaining to some folks earlier that I don't have the right to fly because I do not have any self-power of flight. That if I try to jump out the window, that's going to end badly. So on that basis, like Montana could like say, okay, corporations don't have, like in our corporate charters, there is no power to make donations, and being artificial entities, then corporations would not have any right to something that they do not have the power to do. So yeah, I'd urge people to check out the Montana Plan and the Transparent Election Initiative. As far as like voter suppression in Montana specifically, we've had our share of that over the years. A lot of what was mentioned in those videos has also applied to Montana. Though obviously it's the demographics of who's being targeted tends to be a bit different. One of the things that we've had to face are laws passed down by the state that say that if you have a P.O. box, then instead of a street address, then you're not allowed to vote, which is specifically targeting folks on reservations that rely on that also, as mentioned, tend to vote certain ways. So it's like a lot of these we see, like for example, voter ID laws that are passed. There's the voter IDs that are accepted tend to be like driver's license, passports, or as mentioned, concealed carry weapons. Student IDs are not considered valid, which you can tell sort of like who's being targeted by this. Similarly, for a long time, Montana had same-day voter registration. So you could come to the polling place the last day of the election on November, the second Tuesday of November, and register to vote and vote in that election for a long time until that was overturned in Montana, with an exception for people in the military or people abroad who can still register same day. There was, even though like Montana has had some of the most generous absentee that we have no requirement, no excuse needed to request an absentee ballot. Just if you want one, you can request it. There was a law that was put in place that said that 18-year-olds were not allowed to get the absentee ballots if they weren't 18 at the time that they were requesting the ballot, even though they would have been 18 by the time of the election. And these are all just little things that are meant to make it difficult for people to vote, because it's not really about election security. Because in elections, we have plenty of security measures that in place already. For example, during election a couple cycles ago, a certain candidate suggested that everyone should vote for him twice. So we were dealing with a lot of ballots coming in that had the candidate's name and then write-in candidate with the name filled in. Now, these are flagged in the system that are, the machines are such that that counts as an overvote because you voted for two candidates, and so it gets kicked out, and at which point it's sent to a voter resolution board, at which point, which is a board of three people, one Republican, one Democrat, and one independent, who all have to agree on what the voter intent behind the voter intent was. And then they create a new ballot with that voter intent in mind. So obviously in this case, the vote was still counted because voter intent was clear about who they wanted to vote for. It was just a new ballot was created without the write-in candidate, who is not technically a valid write-in candidate anyway. So let's see. Yeah, any questions folks have?
Did our Secretary of State send our voter information to the Justice Department?
Yes, I just found out about that. According to the Montana Free Press, Secretary of State Christy Jacobson just complied with the demand for Montana voter data, and that article just came out today on that. So.
Well,
I don't have data on that about whether it's on the same. A lot of these have been challenged. It is true. So, one of the other ones we had was where it restricted who being able to turn in votes or not turn in ballots for other people, which is a lot of folks, if you're living on a reservation or if you're disabled, often it can be very difficult to get to a polling place, and being able to just hand that to someone you trust and to turn that in is important for people's enfranchisement. But yeah, that was something that was also where generally in each election cycle we have something new that we have to deal with. The most recent was where write-in, you've always had to have the signature, but where you had to put your birth year on your absentee ballots.
Sorry, my voice is gone, but voter purging of rolls in Montana, has that been an issue?
It hasn't been yet, but with Christy Jacobson complying with the federal government in this regard, that's the idea is that to allow the federal government to come in and say who and who is not eligible. As mentioned in that, it's not universal about who actually can vote. So my confidence in the federal government actually not just making blanket assumptions. For example, if you're a former felon in Montana, you have the right to vote. If you're not currently in prison, you can vote. you're considered to have done your time. I mean, I'm personally for full voter enfranchisement just because there's a perverse incentive that comes when you say that people in prison can't vote, in that like one of the issues they had in a lot of southern states was, in order to prevent blacks from voting, well, we can just charge them with loitering, charge them with vagrancy, and it's like, oh, well, now you're a felon, and now you can't vote. And so that perverse incentive that occurs from denying people the right to vote, even if they are in prison, I think is something that needs to be done away with. Because you also, because if you're to the point where your prison population is large enough that it's actually going to affect the vote, I think you have another problem.
Yeah. Okay, so Secretary of State Jacobson has sent our records to the Trump administration. NPR, about a week or 10 days ago, authoritatively reported, and incidentally, contribute to NPR, MTPR, because this is a good reason why. NPR exposed the fact that earlier this year, when DOJ was invading agencies and gathering up databases, they took the Social Security Administration database, which is what is cross-matched against the voter rolls. When it's sent to Washington, it's cross-matched against the Social Security rolls. That database of Social Security data was illegally transferred by DOJ to a, quote, outside advocacy group that focuses on overturning elections. So the file that is used to cross-match with state voter rolls is now also in the hands of an outside advocacy group. Mm-hmm. Now, if you think the Trump administration will not work with that outside advocacy group to figure out who to bump off those rolls, well, you know, you're very trusting. The fact is, and look up the NPR report on that. And so I think that I was concerned about that when Christy Jacobson was standing on the postcard with the cutout of Trump, that this is what was going on. I think that the appropriate officials and groups should be demanding to know what happened with the Montana voter rolls and should raise this issue very loudly, because you've got to put 2 and 2 together, and that's the 2 and 2.
Indeed. Thank you for sharing. Oh, 1 second.
I'll come up there next.
All right, we'll get you next. Sorry.
I actually have a question, and it's sort of related to this gentleman's statement. I called Christy Jacobson's office last week. I talked to her secretary, and I played nice with her at first, but I asked her flat out if they were sending our voter information to the Trump administration. She assured me under no certain terms would they do that. And then turned around after I made a statement about ICE being in Montana, saying, and she told me that if Democrats and liberals would quit running over ICE agents and quit with the violent rhetoric, that maybe they wouldn't do that. I was wondering personally, because she insulted me very badly, are they supposed to be bipartisan? Is there somebody I can complain to about what her secretary was saying about Democrats and just in general? I mean, she was saying some really awful things about us.
I mean, it's not a bipartisan position. The secretary, I mean, is, but
recently there's been conversation or mention by our president about nationalizing voting and elections, nationalizing elections. What would that look like here?
So that actually runs up on the whole 10th Amendment thing, and why I just touch back on the Montana plan a bit. The reason why, like, the Montana plan actually stands a better chance of being upheld by the Supreme Court, whereas our initial challenge against Citizens United wasn't, is because with the initial challenge, the Supreme Court was upholding Citizens United on the basis of the First Amendment. So it was saying we are upholding the First Amendment, which is that the government shall not make any infringement on the right to speech. They're saying that corporations are included in that, but whereas like the Montana plan is, it would actually require the Supreme Court to overturn the 10th Amendment, which is a much harder proposition and much more problematic. And this, in my view, the same issue would occur with nationalizing voter how elections are handled, because that is currently falls under the 10th Amendment of it is a power given to the state. And so without actually overturning like that constitutional amendment, it would technically be illegal to do so. But
It is 7 o'clock. I want to respect everyone's time. Thank you for coming. Thank you so much for coming. Anybody that wants to stay, you know, Lucas, you have 2 more minutes. We can continue the Q&A for anyone that would like to stay, but thank you so much for coming. Our next film screening is March 1st, Dark Money, here, Sunday, 1 p.m. I'll be sending out an announcement. Thank you, everyone.